guys,
We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years, approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a third grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this, got a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 of our 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is that not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
we are owed $104 trillion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Lord, I was just going on with my intro and I was on mute. Hi, family. Good evening on the West Coast. Good evening in the mountain and the Central and the East Coast. This is Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the Reparationist perspective, bringing you those Friedman hot topics and making the case for reparations and making the case for weaponizing our vote and socializing our suffering. Thank you one and all for tuning back in. As I mentioned on my earlier live, this is day 4 of a Twitter space that my ScrewTube and Facebook audiences were privileged to, because ScrewTube has shut me down, and I made friends in the Twitter space, really more like family. These are comrades in the tribe, getting it done all over the country in the contemporary grassroots reparations movement. And I'm just ecstatic to be able to bring you their insight in Twitter Space Day 4. So without further ado, let me cue it up. Please feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the ScrewTube chat. I cannot see your comments if you're in Facebook. You have to come to Twitter. I'm sorry, you have to come to ScrewTube. Twitter, the same is true for you. You can definitely comment in the Twitter space, but I won't be able to see them because I'm over here on ScrewTube, responding as I'm able to. Okay, I am in the throes of getting my daughter prepared to go off to her dormitory for her first year of college. I'm super ecstatic, but super exhausted at the same time. So forgive me in advance if you don't see me extremely active in the chat. I'm back and forth doing a myriad of things as I listen to the broadcast all over again because I haven't had a chance to listen to the space. So please enjoy it, tune in, please like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. If you feel so compelled, bless the broadcast so that I can bring you more edutainment and advocate some more for reparations and the weaponization of our vote. Thank you so much, one and all, for being here. I really, really greatly appreciate you. So without further ado, let me cue it up. I know I'm early, but I've got to run her sister friend home and then come back. And like I said, get ready for tomorrow. It's going to be a huge day and a long day. It's move-in day for us. All right, family, stand by. Let me share my Twitter. Hold on, my Twitter space. Stand by as I stop the screen. I'll be tuning in from my phone, okay? Listening from my phone. Thank you for being here. I'll be getting started momentarily. Hey, Roz from the DMV. Giving my people a minute to file in before I get started so I don't have to repeat myself unnecessarily. Stand by. We had about 404 people that tuned into this particular Twitter Space Day 4. That was pretty good to be only 4 days into the process. So forgive in advance any technical hiccups. I do my best. Well, it's a learning curve. Okay, family. I'm going to get started because I can't stay as long as I would love to. Well, and it was still 2 hours. I'm just a little exhausted from fighting folks on this issue. And so I had to create a room because it's heavy on my mind. A lot of us are being very misled and have been for years. I still hear people in the grassroots talk about how Europeans kidnapped us from Africa. And albeit that happened much later in the process, but the bottom line is Africa traded us into slavery. They sold us into slavery. And to add insult to injury, we're talking about West Africa, but I've got a lot of people in my Twitter thread going in, trying to undermine my intelligence, trying to insult my intelligence, trying to make this solely about the Europeans. And it's quite insulting to have Africans or whomever these people are, honey, be in this country, benefiting greatly from our ancestors' heinous chattel slave labor, and trying to minimize the role they played in kidnapping and trading our ancestors into slavery. It's like reopening the wound for me. Yes, I get that I'm an empath and uh, maybe I should grow a thicker skin, but I really have a hard time with many of these Africans being in this country, knowing that many of them are from West Africa, knowing that many of them descend from slave traders. They come here and then they minimize what took place and help in the colonization of the legacy of our ancestors' heinous chattel slavery. Um, they come to this country because you have to understand, family, that the only kind of immigrants allowed into this country are the ones that hate us down to their baby toe. We really have no friends. And this back and forth with these Africans has been going on for a long time. I'm not really here to add oil to the fire. I'm not here for that really. I'm here to get this off my chest and I'm here to educate our people as to what really happened and to give you some tools to go and research it for yourself. Because our history is just being whitewashed as our government is allowing this kind of Crayola white supremacy into the country to further oppress us and to give them access over the American freedmen. These are some serious ethnogenocidal plans that we're undergoing right now, mostly spearheaded by the Democrats whom we've been voting for since FDR. And I'm doing everything in my power to share with the people that rock with me about the importance of fighting for reparations and making the case for our reparations and making the case for the weaponization of our vote and the socializing of our suffering. Um, I don't know if you guys have paid attention, but when the Democrats have a trifecta by our vote, we're the only ones in distress. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've been going back and forth for the past day and a half, fighting with folks over what really happened. And I think it's diabolical that they try to say, well, Africa wasn't involved in slave trading, when they know full well North and West Africa absolutely were involved. And my case in point is, why are certain African leaders, why are certain African countries now apologizing for the role they played in trading us into slavery? So, I take serious issue with it because they were really largely responsible. And what took place, they have about, I want to say 46 castles where we were sold from. So many of them want to talk about how they didn't know that the slavery was going to be as heinous as it was. They tried to lighten it up by trying to say, well, yes, while we did have slaves prior to the Atlantic slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, we weren't as brutal to our slaves. And we had no idea that that was happening to you guys. Well, you have to understand how long this went on. They absolutely knew. And then what happened was it turned on them. They were kidnapping us and our kids to trade them into slavery. And when the Europeans saw them not giving two shits about us, our ancestors, they in turn started kidnapping. Now you got people who are kings and different people who are ruling being dragged into slavery. So that's kind of when it occurred. But for the longest, I mean, hundreds of years, they were the ones doing the slave trading. So let me get into a couple of articles that I've pulled up. I want to talk today about their involvement in the slave trade. And I also want to talk about how ugly they are once they get here. One Carnegie Mellon professor in particular, who has gotten caught out there calling us akatas and then pretending like she didn't know what it meant. She didn't know that this term, which really means wild animal, wild cat, or something like that. This is what the Nigerians call us constantly. And a lot of the slave trading came from there. And so I want to talk with you about that. I want to share a couple of articles relative to how we got here. Thank you guys. Welcome to the live. Be sure to raise your hand so you can weigh in. This stuff is heavy on me, knowing that a lot of these Africans have been given such position over us. They're here to replace us. They don't give a damn about us. And listen, I don't mean all, there are exceptions, but very few in this country, because this country is hell bent on only allowing people who despise us down to our baby toe into this country. As you notice with the poor Haitians um, that came over to the Mexico border, you saw how they treated them. And what I want you to understand by the end of today's space is that the Africans are continuing to use us as a resource in the same way America with 3Ks continues to use us as a resource. They're continuing to mule us out. They're continuing to weaponize our Holocaust against us to gain access to everything that is owed us. They have a great disdain in this country for us. They descend from slave traders. They've got money and they've got education. And now they've come over here and they've taken over in corporate. They've taken over in the public sector, the private sector, in education, in medicine. All the things that we've been robbed and deprived of, they have access to. And as I mentioned before, I know it's a repeat for many of you. I share with you about a 2004 to 2014 Color of Wealth LA report where they were 60,000 liquid to US Black 200 liquid. Their median income was 115,000 to our 53.5. And yet they come over here and call us all kinds of akatas and are now in professorships and in education running the show. And so you have to understand that these Black immigrants with education and money, which is the only kind that the US will allow into this country, are coming here to replace us. And that's why I constantly teach you guys that immigration is our most imminent threat. I hope by the end of this space today, you will come to understand the dire need to weaponize our vote by voting closed border candidates and reparations candidates only, party be damned. This upcoming midterm and for several election cycles to come. It is on us to weaponize the vote to bring the Democrats to their knees until they're screaming and begging to pay us this repair. And if we don't show up to these polls in Obama-style numbers, it's going to be to our peril. And so I'm over here to make that case because, like I mentioned, there are other spaces with bigger platforms in mind. And they are literally pretending like they're not encouraging people to stay home when you're constantly insisting on tangibles that are not going to come when the Democrats see that you gladly show up to the polls and vote for them without demanding tangibles. We've already proven that we're willing to do that all the way to the bottom of this Titanic as the anchor of this country's capitalism. So they don't need to give you tangibles at this stage. There has to be a consequence and a repercussion. And both parties suck. I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, sharing about a Friedman voter strategy that I believe we need to move as a block on, that I believe needs to gain critical mass, akin to our ancestors who weren't privy to social media, but were able to change from the repugnant clans to the Democrats when the repugnant clans refused to give them civil rights. Civil rights that we no longer have, family. We can literally go out our door and be gunned down by the Glacier Donkey race soldiers. We have no protections, while the Joe Crow administration gives protections to the immigrants, gives our reparations to the immigrants. So what I'm saying here in my Freedmen voter strategy has nothing to do with liking repugnant clans, has nothing to do with a party. It has everything to do with bringing the Democrats to their knees for their intentional neglect, for their intentional ethno-genocidal plans against us, to make us a permanent bottom caste in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Immigrants and white folks are eating from that wealth. And white supremacy is Crayola. So let me get to my first article. Let me see if I have any. Oh, hold on, guys. I'm just now looking down. I'm seeing 2 requests. Phoenix Star and Kite are in the building. I welcome each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining. Forgive my low energy, but this topic is very exhausting because I'm constantly labeled a xenophobe because I stand up hard and fast for American freedmen. And what they want to do in labeling me and calling me names is to make sure I don't talk about it. You see, there are lots of people, including the immigrants, very invested in us just dying in the gas chamber. They want to silence us. So they throw out these names. They claim that we're hate groups. I mean, it's just a lot going on right now, but I refuse to let it stop me. So let's get into it. Welcome to the space. Please share it out. And please raise your hand. Oh, there's Phoenix Star. Did you want to say something before I get into my first article? Go ahead and bless the mic, sis.
Hi, my loves. Yes, I'm sorry because I'm gonna have to drop off, but I do want to just remind everyone that, and thank you so much, Reparationist Perspective, for having this space. And I liked your opening, and I wanted to, and from that opening, I wanted to add to it that we mustn't forget that we have civil rights. We have, when we feel like we're being discriminated against because of our lineage, we don't forget that we can delineate ourselves and and use our EEOC rights and things like that when it comes to professions and jobs, and use that as discrimination. If you feel like you're being discriminated against or we're being discriminated against as freedmen, we have to stop using Black. We cannot use Black anymore. We got to fix our tongues when we want to say it because we're freedmen. And if freedmen are being discriminated against in professions and in jobs, we need to use our rights that our ancestors fought for. So no more Black, freedmen. And we need to start using that. And let's not forget that because we fought for it. And so that's why the delineation is super important, even if it's not done nationwide yet. On the law books, we need to know that in our minds and in our hearts and use it for our civil rights. And I land there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for blessing the mic. I appreciate you, sis, always. Okay, so let me jump in, and I may be jumping around a little bit, but I'll land and get to the point here. I want to talk about how these Africans were involved. Let me pull up my first article. Lord, I got so many screens open. Let me find it. Just a second, family. Forgive me. And then, oh man, so much stuff to share. I don't even know how I'm going to get through all this.
Just chunk it, sis. Just chunk it. Chunk it piece by piece. If we have
Yeah,
to do
that's
a part two.
that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I may have to do a part 2. Okay, so here's an article. Now it's dated back in 2009, but this is when African chiefs were being urged to apologize for the slave trade. So what I'm going to do is read and, of course, comment on current events in between some of what's happening here. So African chiefs are urged to apologize for the slave trade. And yet, this is me speaking, as I mentioned for the past, day and a half, I've been fighting over this issue because there are people who are sitting up here trying to make us believe that we were kidnapped by Europeans. Now, that did happen, but as I mentioned prior, it happened later, after we set the stage. You know how this country set the stage to teach Hitler how to wipe out the Jewish community? Okay. Well, in that same vein, these Africans, um, the African chiefs in particular, were teaching the Europeans how to kidnap us because they showed them through their actions of trading us into slavery that they didn't give a damn about us. Okay. This made them very, very profitable. And that's why you see many West Africans in this country faring far better than us, because they've got a huge head start from being descendants of slave traders. They don't want us to know that, but that's absolutely who they are. Okay. Back to the text. Nigerian civil rights group says tribal leaders' ancestors sold people to slavers and should say sorry like the US and Britain. Let me speak right here. Apologizing is not good enough, and apologize doesn't make us whole. It's cute and all to apologize, and I don't know if you guys are aware that Barack Obama secretly apologized. I mean, I didn't even learn about it until many moons later. That I do believe it was 2008 that he apologized for slavery. And we've had a few apologies for slavery, in a roundabout way. But the only way to really apologize is with that Skrilla, is to cut the check. It's not a real formal apology until that's attached. So yes, apology is a part of it, but restitution is what we care about. You can keep your apology. If I got to choose between my reparations and your apology, keep the apology and run us those checks. Back to the text. Traditional African rulers whose ancestors collaborated with European and Arab slave traders should follow Britain and the US by publicly saying sorry, according to human rights organizations. The Civil Rights Congress of Nigeria has written to tribal chiefs saying, quote, "We cannot continue to blame the white men, as Africans, particularly the traditional rulers, are not blameless." The appeal has reopened a sensitive debate over the part some chiefs played. Lots of chiefs, family. 176 countries were involved from the continent. Lots of chiefs. The appeal has reopened a sensitive debate over the part some chiefs played in helping to capture their fellow Africans and sell them into bondage as part of the transatlantic slave trade. The Congress argued that the ancestors of the chiefs had helped to raid and kidnap defenseless communities and traded us to Europeans. They should now apologize to put a final seal to the history of slave trade, it said. Me speaking. Now, what they traded us for was guns and ammunition and cloth and alcohol, mainly. It was a very, very profitable industry, and that's why they were kidnapping us before the Europeans start kidnapping them. When they showed the Europeans they didn't give a damn about their fellow brothers and sisters and children, that's when Europeans got in on the act, after Africa set the standard. Go ahead, Phoenix Star.
I wanted to add to add to something that you and I connect on, but I want to just make a point about universal law and karma, right? So you see how, this was done to us and our ancestors, but you see how colonialism came and swept over the continent, right? So, when you dig a grave for somebody, you digging it for yourself. That's one way to look at it. What goes around comes around. Um, if they do it to you, they gonna do it to others. They're gonna do it to you. So, and essentially, that's the karma of what happened to the continent. Hence, this is where we are today. Okay, and I'm just gonna land there. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. And you have to understand, family, that we didn't flee our Holocaust akin to the way they did theirs, which makes them even ultra ungrateful to try to minimize what happened, especially given that by and large, American freedmen are still enduring their never-ending Holocaust. Always remember you're the strongest. I don't give a damn how much they try to call us a kata and degrade us and denigrate us as a group. We are the strongest because we're still here fighting white supremacy, standing 10 toes down and doing everything we can in our power to defeat it. They fled their Holocaust, and their countries are in tribal wars galore, and many of their African leaders are still selling them out. So they sold our ancestors out, and they still have these very people leading the charge, brokering deals with the Europeans, now the Asians, to pretty much rob and pillage the continent. So you do reap. There is a universal law of sowing and reaping that's occurring to these very ones. And I'm not speaking about all. I shouldn't even have to say that. But, it seems that I always have to clarify that I'm only talking about those whom this applies to. So thank you for sharing. Phoenix Star, back to the text. If I don't see your hand, I will break in between these different segments that I'm bringing you this afternoon to see if you want to weigh in. Okay. Let me back up. Okay. Estimates vary that between 10 million and 28 million Africans were sent to the Americas and sold into slavery between 1450 and the early 19th century. More than 1 million are believed to have died in transit across the so-called Middle Passage of the Atlantic due to inhumane conditions aboard slave ships and the brutal crushing of any resistance. 3 years ago, Tony Blair described Britain's participation as a crime against humanity and expressed his deep sorrow. The U.S. Senate voted for an apology this year. Okay, that's me speaking. This is what I'm talking about with respect to Barack Obama's apology, and I'll get to that momentarily. This is a one that was pretty much hidden. And like I said, Tony and Obama, they can apologize till times get better. We need for them to make us whole because they didn't stop with slavery. It continued with Jim Crow, and now we've got accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. This is why I'm okay with the debt being 6.6 quadrillion, according to Thomas Kramer's number, wherein he multiplied slavery at 3 cents per hour by 18 hours per day. From 1776 to 1865, compounded at 6%, because that's on the very low end. It's now 6.6 quadrillion on the very low end, because he doesn't even factor in Jim Crow, nor the rest. That's just for slavery. And so I'm not afraid of numbers like that, because we didn't ask you to stroke a check, like in one sitting. If it took you 500 years to drive us into the bottom of this Titanic as the anchor of this country's capitalism, as you continue to do it until you get your oppressive boots, figuratively and literally, up off our necks, then the debt is going to continue to mount as long as it takes. But we're leaning in, and we're not laying off this topic. We are here. The contemporary grassroots reparations movement is not giving in, we're not giving up, and we're not giving out, because guess why? We can't afford to. And it's time to trade places, quite frankly. Back to the text. Now, when they say more than 1 million have died, I don't know if any of you have read the book, The Black Holocaust, but it says we lost 100 million at sea. So just be mindful that these numbers are mighty wild that I'm seeing on some of these posts. For example, I saw one say something about, and let me read it. I don't want to guesstimate, but it appeared to me that they were talking about more slaves that had come into this country than we had in numbers at the end of emancipation. I'll get to it. Stand by. Let me just finish this up. Sekou Sani, head of the Congress, said it was calling for traditional rulers to apologize now because they were seeking inclusion in a forthcoming constitutional amendment in Nigeria. Quote, let me say this while it's on my dome, because I don't want to forget to share this part. Another thing that really irks my last nerve is how Ghana did a return to Africa grift, is what I call it, because there was no citizenship attached to it, no land, no money. This is what I mean by them continuing to mule American freedmen. Because when you come over there, now you're being charged a black tax to even go to the Gory Islands and all these different places where these castles, where they actually held us as slaves until it was time to board those ships. As foreigners, we're charged exponentially higher than everyone else just to go and see the horrors that they leveled at us. Okay, I'll play a little bit of that momentarily. Back to the text. So yeah, just to finish that thought, I really resent them doing these empty kind of gestures to continue to mule us, to continue to get money out of us without giving us anything tangible. If you really want to return to Ghana, you give people citizenship, you give them land, and you give them money. That's a real true apology to me. There's restitution involved, remuneration involved, not just I'm sorry. And it does nothing to stop our never-ending Holocaust that we're still undergoing just every day, just for being American freedmen. It's not a black thing. It's an American freedmen, anti-American freedmen racist sentiment from the Crayola white supremacists in this country. Back to the text. We felt that for them to have the moral standing to be part of our constitutional arrangement, there are some historical issues for them to address, he told the BBC World Service. One part of which is the involvement of their institutions in the slave trade. Once again, this is me speaking. I'm sharing this space. Many of you may be up on this, racket where they're trying to pretend that we were kidnapped, you know, by the Europeans. Because I hear some of you, I know this information, but far too many of us do not. Far too many of us, even in this movement, are still talking about we were kidnapped, we were stolen. These are lies, and I'm here in this space to tell the truth. Okay, hold on. Phoenix Star, bless the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had my hand up, but yeah, I gotta go. I wish I could stay for forever and listen to everything, but I have to go. It was something I wanted to add to it, but I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry, everyone.
That's okay,
I'm
dear.
multitasking over here. I'm working, I'm typing, I'm sending emails. I am so sorry. It was something I wanted to add to it though. But I do like your point about the grift on the
Oh yeah.
going back. Oh, I got it. You know why the 100 million that we lost at sea and all that stuff? It's a lie. That's a lie. They didn't lose 100 million Africans at sea. You know why? Because it was Black people over here already. And that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. Maybe I'll do a space on that. But we were here already. We've been all over the globe. So they just kind of blended us in. But we were part of the native indigenous people over here. And I'll land there.
Yeah, you're absolutely, thank you. You're absolutely right. We were here before the Mayflower. You should read that book if you haven't. Yeah, I still don't know why they. Okay, so the Black Holocaust is inflaming that number. Wow, it's hard to know what to believe. But all I know is that Africa did participate heavily in this slave trade. Okay, it was very profitable for them. And I'm going to read you another article from the New York Times. Just I'm gonna skip around and share the article with you so you can read it at nauseum at your leisure. But one Nigerian sister, admitted that her great grandfather was a slave trader. That made the New York Times. So stand by. Let me get back to the text so I can finish this up. Feel free to raise your hand. I'll get to you as I see you. Okay. Okay. So back to the text. One part of which is the involvement of their institutions in the slave trade. He said that on behalf of the buyers of slaves, the ancestors of the traditional rulers raided communities and kidnapped people, shipping them away across the Sahara or across the Atlantic. Many slaves captured inland in Africa died on the long journey to the coast. The position was endorsed by Henry Bonsu, a British-born broadcaster of Ghanaian descent who examined the issue in Ghana for a radio documentary. He said some chiefs had accepted responsibility and sought atonement by visiting Liverpool and the US. Quote, I interviewed a chief who acknowledged there was collaboration and that without that involvement, we wouldn't have seen human trafficking on an industrial scale, said Bonsu, the co-founder of digital station Colorful Radio. Quote, an apology in Nigeria might be helpful because the chiefs did some terrible things and abetted a major crime. The non-government organization Africa Human Rights Heritage, based in Accra, Ghana, supports the campaign for an apology. Before Anning, its chief executive said, quote, I certainly agree with the Nigeria Civil Rights Congress that the traditional leaders should render an apology for their role in the inhumane slavery administration. He said it would accord with the UN's position on human rights. But the issue was not a high priority for most African citizens, according to Bonsu. Quote, in my experience, it's mainly the African diaspora who want an apology. People aren't milling around Lagos or Accra moaning about why chiefs don't apologize. They are more concerned about the everyday and why they still have bad governance. Fred Swaniker, the founder of the African Leadership Academy, said, I'm not sure whether an apology is needed, but it would be worth looking at and acknowledging the role Africa did play in the slave trade. Someone had to find the slaves and bring them before the Europeans. The shameful history of some traditional leaders remains an awkward subject on which many politicians prefer to maintain silence. One exception was in 1998 when Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, told an audience, including Bill Clinton, quote, African chiefs were the ones waging war on each other and capturing their own people and selling them. If anyone should apologize, it should be the African chiefs. We still have traitors here even today. No, they all need to apologize and they all need to pay restitution to the American freedmen. Africa, Europe, and America with 3 Ks. They all owe us reparations. Now, we're fighting this one fight at a time, and the biggest animal to wrestle is the one who's constantly running around the country, charging other countries like China with crimes against humanity, charging Russia with crimes against humanity, while our brothers, our unarmed brothers, sisters, and children are being executed by the race soldiers with impunity. That's the hypocrisy of it all. So we only have the bandwidth to fight one devil at a time. But please stop feeding into this narrative that Europeans stole us from the continent of Africa, that Europeans, kidnapped us. A lot of that didn't happen until Africa set the stage that this was okay. They were the ones to do that, okay? So I want to bring up next, I want to share with you this audio of Harry Lewis Gates and some other tourists that are visiting the castles in Ghana. And I want you to hear the gentleman share about it. Another thing you have to stop believing is that they didn't know how horrific it was. That's a lie. They knew and did not give a damn. Much like they don't give a damn now that they're undermining our reparations fight. They don't mind that at all. They don't mind that we've been locked out of access to the seat of our own table of reparations on a federal scale. They're in these, the Pan-Africanist organizations are a ruse. And so for them to have been instrumental in trading us into slavery, and then to have their hands out and think they're owed reparations for racism after it was our ancestors who built the wealth they now eat from, that is just an insult to me of exponential proportion. So I want to play a segment of this Henry Louis Gates touring the castles of Ghana, from the point of no return. Stand by. Now, this is where we're being charged exorbitant fees to take a tour of. That should not be the case. That should be free to every American freedman, as far as I'm concerned. Make your government pay. Okay, stand by. I'll be glad when I get my screw tube back. I usually share these videos on my live. So hopefully in another day, hopefully by Monday, I will be back on screw tube. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe over there as well. Stand by.
While we come. But the memory of slavery and of what our ancestors must have gone through is always lurking. Even a pretty little harbor town like Elmina is dominated by its slave castle. And for us, a slave castle is like Auschwitz. Right in here.
This very dungeon housed between 150 and 200 women for 3 good months. This is where they slept, yes. But the place was much overcrowded. So there wasn't enough space for one even to lie down. The result was an outbreak of malaria and yellow fever. So by the time the sisters arrived, more than half were already dead. Well, this is the infamous room of no return. And that is also the door of no return. When the slaves got here, they never knew where they were going. Neither did they know what was going to happen to them. All they knew was to get out of this room onto the boats. Some actually committed suicide because that was the only way they thought they could get their freedom. In fact, it was the Africans who did the raiding and selling of Africans to the Europeans. No European ever went into the hinterland to raid for slaves. It was the Africans who did it. And before the Europeans even landed here, slavery was already in the system. It was slaves that worked in the palaces. The kings.
I thought it was more, even at that time, than just money. It had to be just something else that drove them to just kill these people.
Yeah, why brutalize them like that?
Why brutalize them? But then again, I guess that's justification or rationalization. If you brutalize it, then you have to say to yourself, there's no way we as a Christian people could brutalize other humans, so they can't be humans.
But did it surprise you when you found out that Africans were involved as well as middlemen?
The thing I knew that Africans were involved. I didn't know the extent to what they were involved, and I also didn't know that once they found out what was going on here, and I know that they had to know what was going on here, that they stayed a willing participant in it. That's the crazy part of it.
I think I was surprised and hurt and angry and everything because, these were people that, you know, I sort of had a fantasy about them and as our ancestors, and your ancestors don't sell you. So that fantasy was sort of blown away. And I had a whole range of that.
This isn't my first visit to a slave castle, but it is the first time I've heard a tour guide be so explicit about the role of the Africans. Most of us come here to beat up on the Europeans, and God knows they deserve it. I'm actually surprised at how honest he was. Dr. Akosua Purby teaches African history and is specialized in the slave trade.
The Europeans came to Africa in the 15th century. And when they arrived, they found a well-knit political system in Africa.
A well-made political system?
Yes, well-knit political system. In other words, they were centralized seats with kings, chiefs, well-established political systems. They also found that there was a well-established economic system in terms of trading and so on. And so they recognized who the Africans were. And they found strong states, kings who were ready to negotiate with them on equal basis and partnership basis, both in the trade and so on. And in fact, when the Europeans started building the forts and castles, they asked permission from the kings to build their land, to build the forts, and then they paid rent for the forts. So they needed, as it were, the Africans to agree on equal basis or partnership basis to enslave their fellow Africans.
So if Africans had not sold other Africans to the Europeans, there wouldn't have been a slave trade?
I think so. Because the Africans were strong enough. If they had said no, perhaps the Europeans themselves would have tried to go inland, and that would have been very, very difficult.
When I come to Africa, the first thing that comes to my mind, what would my life be like if my ancestors hadn't been enslaved? Mm-hmm. What would I be?
Maybe you would have been a chief in Asante Mampong.
I like being chief.
Yeah, chief, and people have called you Nana, Nana Brebre, Nana Brebre, Nana Brebre.
It's a nice idea. But if my ancestors had been chiefs, it's not very likely that they would have ended up in chains on a slave ship. It's more likely that they'd have been selling slaves and buying guns.
Since the time the first Black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa.
So even Angela Davis was instrumental in pushing the kidnap narrative. That's how long we've been sold the lie, family. That's how long we've been sold the lie. And ergo why this space is here. And so now you've got their not only just their participation in the slave trade, but a lot of them, the descendants of these slave traders, are now in the USA, now in America with 3 Ks. And tragically, far too many of them still carry this superiority sentiment. They have fled their Holocaust. They have come here to tether themselves to ours while participating in Crayola white supremacy to keep us tethered to the bottom.
They like being superior to us in this country. I want to move next to, proving that. Now, this is Professor Uju Anya now apologizing to Black Americans for calling us a kata. For 30 plus years, she's called us that. She is a professor at Carnegie Mellon. And I want to give a shout out to Philip Scott, Audio Experience. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe. He's one of the other screw tubers, contributors that I follow. I look at quite a few to get inspiration for my pieces and to put the pieces of my presentations together like a puzzle. And so shout out to him because he also has a great video on this very issue. So these are the very denigrating things they do to us to participate in the Crayola white supremacy going on in this country to guarantee their butter biscuits, to guarantee that they stay large and in charge, to guarantee that they continue to mule the American freedmen whom they are responsible for. They get to eat from the wealth that our ancestors generated with their lives, all the while denigrating us, demeaning us, telling each other not to fraternize with us, not to marry us. It's a lot. Let's read this. Hold on one second. So this is an exchange between Ivy Anyador and Uju Anya, the professor at Carnegie Mellon. That's a job that should be going to American freedmen. Immigrants should be in third and fourth place when it comes to the public and private sectors and in education. And everything, the immigrants should not be the ones large and in charge in this country, especially in the government. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment. So I'm going to read what transpired. And, let me just get into it. So Ivy, the interviewer, says, do you see a kata? Now, Ivy, too, is Nigerian, just like Uju Anya. And so she's asking her, do you see a kata as a derogatory term? She says, now this was March 9, 2020. No, I do not. Arguments are made about it being a slur, specifically deriding an ancestry, including the enslaved. But it has not been my experience, and I certainly don't use it as such. How convenient. It's a very helpful term to distinguish a very specific population too often taken as a whole. This is her referring to us as a katas to delineate from her as a Nigerian, and she doesn't see that as derogatory. But you a whole professor at Carnegie Mellon. Speaking of which, before I forget, there's a call to action to tweet Carnegie Mellon for her termination. We have got to be the ones to create the calls to actions to come down on these institutions' heads for hiring anti-American freedmen, racist in every level. Whenever we see this showing up, it's time for us to send them back to Africa to go over there and spin this bullshit. You don't get to be in this country that our ancestors built with their lives and talk shit to our children. You don't get to be in charge of their minds. But this is what Crayola white supremacists loves, to put them in a position to denigrate us and to set us up for the preschool to prison pipelines. They have gotten rid of about 200,000 Black teachers nationwide and have paid these immigrants around $50K starting salaries. They don't even speak the King's English, and they're in these schools with the white teachers, setting our children up for the preschool to prison pipeline while giving all kinds of concessions to the Hispanics for English as a second language. They get all kinds of breaks. They get all types of scholarships. I just shared yesterday how they've got 500 to our 100 institutions, the Hispanics. I don't want to get too far off topic, but I'm just trying to make a point about how white supremacy in this country is Crayola and the color of white supremacy is green, and why we need to weaponize the vote to close the borders and come down on these people's motherfucking heads every time they talk to us sideways, get them fired through our own actions, through our own calls to actions. Carnegie Mellon's phones should be blowing up off the hook that she can call us a kata for 30 years and be making 6 figures as an educator. And this is the kind of stuff that the Joe Crow administration will not give us protections. But let you say this about somebody ooish and see how fast heads spin to get rid of them. This kind of stuff right here should warrant you being terminated from your job, and you should have to leave this country, because I couldn't do this over in Nigeria and not be handled. Back to the text. Ivy says, interesting. The translation seems derogatory, and I'm not sure why Black American wouldn't suffice. It is usually used when making derisive statements. It's not a term of endearment or respect. I was surprised to see it, and I wanted to ask you about it before making assumptions. So she's giving her an opportunity to clean her shit up. But she doubles down. Black American does not suffice, because Blacks in and from the US are not the only Black Americans, me speaking. This is why flattening Blackness is problematic. And I'm grateful to California and all the work we've put in out here to get data disaggregation. We are now referred to as American freedmen, descendant of U.S. chattel slavery out here. And now we can peel back the layers of the onion and see this state's policies and legislations that have driven us down from 17 to 3% in this state, and hold them accountable, starting with the public sector. So she believes that in order to distinguish American freedmen from Black Americans, she must refer to us for the last 30 years as a kata. Back to the text. Which was the exact point of my tweet. The Americans are vast and replete with diverse Blackness. I was very purposeful in my use of the word, which I didn't pose as derogatory. No, you don't believe it's derogatory to refer to us as a kata when you're making a distinction between your group as Black American and our group as American freedmen. You see the slick shit they do and get away with? Back to the text. Ivy goes on to say, the content of the tweet itself was already derisive. And when linked with the translation of the word, she gives a shruggy shoulder. I was surprised to see it. But that's why I asked. I didn't want to assume your intention. Do you think it matters how the group of people you refer to feel about that term? Professor goes on to say, a read of a kata as derogatory accepts the premise that it is an insult to say that someone is descended from enslaved Africans. It is absolutely no shame or disgrace to be a child of the enslaved, says the more than likely descendant of slave traders. Shame lies with the captors and the enslavers. Plus, why would I insult myself? Now see, she know full and hot damn well that she don't descend from U.S. chattel slavery. If she did, would she be using a kata to refer to herself as that and to us as that? Come on, family. This is the bullshit they are constantly pulling. It's not just her. It's not just her. But I'm singling her out because this is new. It's a current event. I'd be here for several months outing all the ones that do this kind of bullshiggity. That should go the puck back to Africa if they believe that we're wild animals. So now she's being slick with it. Ivy goes on to say, a term for descendants of enslaved Africans wouldn't be derogatory. The issue is that the term translates to wild animals in Yoruba. This professor, who's been using this term for 30 years to delineate who we are as American freedmen, descendant of U.S. chattel slavery, go on to say, I'm not familiar with the dictionary translation, nor aware anyone uses it so. For 30 plus years, I've known it as a term for U.S. Blacks, sometimes used derisively by Africans who seek to distinguish themselves as not descendant from the enslaved. I'm not that group, nor do I use it in that way. Okay, Professor Uju Anya. Ivy says, fair enough. I didn't know what it meant either initially, but I asked my mom at some point, we're not Yoruba, but if you look it up, that's what it means. Anyway, I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks for engaging with me on this. And she goes on to say, thanks for challenging me on a perception of my disdain for others I surely did not intend to communicate. Here comes the cover. I appreciate your respectful approach and sincere desire to understand where I was coming from instead of automatically assuming my ill will. That's about the most honest thing she said in the whole damn exchange. My ill will. Because that's exactly how it was intended. Let me see if there's any hands. Okay, not yet. All right, moving on. So I'm calling for us to stay on the heads of Carnegie Mellon to get her terminated. So now this. Okay, so this is one of the texts and the context in which she was using Akata. No shade at the good sis. However, Akata need to quit with these assumptions that their blackness is the only one alive in the Americas. Mexico has a large, thriving Black population, especially in Oaxaca, Veracruz, and Guerrero. I thought this was the year. Okay, so this is what she wrote that prompted this. She wrote that last response I just read. She's replying to someone here. And she says, I thought this was the year of the return. NEPA couldn't bring small light, even for Akata. So that's the context in which she said it. And then someone called her out about it. And then she says, no shade at the good sis. However, Akata need to quit with these assumptions. How are you assuming when you're referencing the Great Return, which I believe to be a grift, to mule American freedmen for more as a resource, because they're not offering citizenship, they're not offering land, they're not offering reparations of any sort. So what's the point in a great return to Ghana if those things aren't attached to the Great Return and your apologies? And so you're talking about the year of the return, and you thought NEPA couldn't bring small light, even for Akata. You don't see that as derogatory, and so when you're called out about it, you're still going in calling us Akata. So you use it derogatorily, And yet you pretend that that's not how you're using it. So apparently, Twitter came for her head. And so now she's apologizing. They're probably coming for her head and for her job. First, I apologize for the offense and hurt I caused. Perception is reality, and impact outweighs intent. So, although I did not use the word with any intent to slur African Americans, that is what I ultimately did. Akata is a Yoruba word. I don't speak Yoruba, so I didn't know its literal meaning, wild animal, until 2 years ago. Now, she's been using this word for 30 years. She's a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I knew some use it as a slur. So if you knew that some use it as a slur, then you know that it's a slur. You want to bless the mic, Native?
I just here's my big observation from the day and watching all of these exchanges happen on Twitter. It seems that Voltron can assemble to disaggregate when it's time for them to own up to something that they have done. This is this flies in the face. This is everything that we have been saying and that they have been propagandizing against. Nothing about their character and their consciousness has changed over the last 500 years. And yet they want to sell us on some notion of we all black everywhere when it's just an opportunity for them to use us for cover and cultural sanctuary in foreign lands, particularly in the United States. They withdrew to their borders. They're telling us we don't know what Akata means because we're not Nigerian or we're not Yoruba. That's not our native tongue. And the whole point of it is we don't want to be called that. And why are we arguing about something that is offensive to us? And why is it that you are doubling down on your right to offend? This consciousness of these people, my heart is hardened over the last couple of years for them. And this is just another nail in the coffin. These people are our adversaries and they mean us no good. They do not have the spirituality and the consciousness that we have cultivated to withstand this type of psychological and emotional attack in this land. And then here they come showing up basically to finish the job of their ancestors. And I just don't have any more empathy or sympathy for them at all. Thank you.
Thank you for blessing the mic. This is what I'm saying. They do these smoke. They like to play both sides. They're no different than the Latinas who like to play the people of color and whiteness at their discretion. Now they want to be Black Americans in order to tether themselves to the reparations we are owed after their ancestors traded us into slavery, all the while lying and trying to minimize their involvement and trying to say it was only one country. And you're saying this about all of Africa and it's a continent. You don't even know the difference. We've got so many countries and da 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 da. And, just insulting my intelligence for the last day and a half. That's why I had to do this space, fam. Go ahead, PJ. Is that PJ? You want to bless the mic? Okay, PJ, hop in when you're ready. I'm going to finish. But this is what I'm saying. They like to play both sides. They like to be identified as Black American when convenient, but when they want to distinguish and delineate themselves from who we are, we become Akatas. And although you know, as a professor at Carnegie Mellon, that it's oftentimes used as a racial slur, as an anti-American freedman racist sentiment, you choose to use it because you're lying and saying that that's not the intent. Akin to the way that y'all are now lying that Africans weren't involved in the slave trade. So let me finish this out and so I can move on to the next, because what I'm about to share with you next is really creating a problem. So she says, I knew that some use it as a racial slur for descendants of the enslaved, which she claims to be. Do you know any slave owners named Anya? Did we have any slave owners in America with 3 Ks? I don't know of anyone that descends from U.S. chattel slavery with the last name of Anya. But now that we are on her heads, she is now pretending that she's one of us for cover. And she just didn't know because she didn't look it up. But oh, I do know that some people use it as a racial slur. But I'm one of you. Let me see who else is over here. Hold on. My sister Rella. Sister Rella, go ahead and bless the mic, sis.
Hey, so you have to forgive me. I think coming on and just listening to this, I had sent you something in DM, and I think it just kind of forces the opinion, or not opinion, but just drives it home that these people are in all sectors and industries, in places that are in the same positions of authority. And my family has been dealing with some things over the last 10 years. And my youngest niece is now caught up to the point where you have a situation where a judge in a Nigerian family is trying to pretty much take my younger niece from our family. And so just listening to, I think, this message and how these people operate, in the sense of they don't care for our situation and our lineage and our families. And you can tell by the way that they talk to us, whether it's in academia, whether it is in just everyday lives, when you meet people from different nationalities, they really are very degrading and dishonest in how they treat us. And it shows. Even if this woman didn't even use the term Akata, which we know they do use, they'll use another form of language or, terms. But the one thing they never seem to be able to do is to tap into that element of lineage that we have, that connection that we have in our being, that feeling of love and pain and everything that built our generations. They never seem to tap into that. And you can tell, because the first thing that they do is they always circle it back around to them. They try to center them and center Africa into the conversation by eliminating the discussion on who we are and who our ancestors are here. And I think that's very disingenuous. I'm not saying that, people do not have people from different countries in their background. You have probably multiple connections with different cultures and people from different areas. But the one thing we have never done, I think, in this land is title any other group connected to our ancestors in a degrading way. And you don't see that in return. We get the opposite. We get actually what the colonizers pretty much do and did, and their ancestors repeated. It's like wash, rinse, and repeat. From the language to any industry, you can just choose any industry, and it will be the same. Our government fuels it. Immigration fuels it. And you have to forgive me, but my this just doesn't sit well. And she's in academia. Like, I seen Black men go after the woman on TikTok who was a psychologist, doing what she did, and no one seems to want to, like, this woman should be questioned. Somebody, she needs to be brought before a board, something. She needs to be stripped. There's no reason why she should even be a professor at this point. Like, that is just a blatant display of egregious racism, prejudice, and discrimination, whatever you want to call it. She can throw everything, in the kitchen sink at what she's saying and what she did. Period. So I'll land my plane. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for blessing the mic, sis. Native, did you want to bless the mic again before I move on?
No, let's carry on. Thank you.
All right, very good. So the last third of her bullshit states, when I used Akata here 2 years ago, I knew some use it as an anti-African American slur. However, I thought my not meaning or using it that way, me speaking, for the past 30 years, made it okay. I was wrong, and I sincerely apologize. It's exhausting. Sisterella, I felt your pain. And you're absolutely right. As a tribe, we still bear the scars of our never-ending Holocaust because it hasn't ended for us. There's nowhere for us to run. We couldn't afford to if we wanted to. And so we have a common bond that even though many of us have yet to meet face to face, there is compassion for one another. And we understand the post-traumatic slave syndrome that we still suffer under. We understand how waking up American freedmen in this country means being in a constant state of rage. And her being in academia is no different than how we have to go to corporate America in public and private sectors and deal with these freaking microaggressions from all the other Crayolas, all the other Crayola white supremacists. Our children have to endure that in the classroom and be taught all manner of confusion and take these microaggressions and bury it within themselves. And then we have to spend the rest of our days affirming them. Next, I want to go to how they're taking over, which is going to lead me to my final frontier, at least of this segment. I might have to do a part 2 because there's some other points I want to make. I want to talk about. No, I got to get this in. Let me get this in. I got to get this in because I don't know if any of you know about this, but hold on. Let me bring up the tab. Just a second. I got 3 things to give y'all. Lord have mercy. Did any of you know that the U.S. has officially apologized 5 times? No reparations But they've apologized 5 times, and we still don't have them checks direct deposit to our accounts. This week, Barack Obama became the first sitting president of the U.S. to visit the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Now, let me tell you the date. I'm reading from the Smithsonian Magazine, and this is dated May 27, 2016. There's a picture of Reagan signing the Civil Liberties Act of '88 that apologized for the internment of Japanese American citizens and permanent residents during World War II. So Barack visited Hiroshima. A U.S. president visiting the site where the first nuclear bomb was dropped is significant enough, but during the lead up to the visit, both American and Japanese officials were careful to make sure that no one expected Obama to issue a formal apology for the bombing. While there won't be an apology for the devastation the bombs caused in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in recent decades, the U.S. has taken steps to apologize for some significant actions it took part in over the centuries. Here are 5 instances where the U.S. government formally apologized for its actions. Shielding a Nazi officer wanted for war crimes. I'm not going to read all this. Y'all can look up this article. The internment of Japanese citizens during World War II. They paid them $20,000 apiece, and that's why you see them winning in this country that our ancestors built with their lives. The overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii. The Tuskegee experiment. No money attached. An apology for slavery and the Jim Crow laws. I'm going to read this. Few things compromised the core values of the U.S. Constitution and left as lasting a mark on American society as 246 years of institutionalized slavery and the subsequent discrimination of the Jim Crow laws that marked African Americans as second-class citizens. Me speaking. We are now fourth-class citizens thanks to the Democrats in flooding this country with immigrants. Back to the text. The formal apology, this is the one I was talking about, so now I don't have to look that one up. The formal apology for slavery and Jim Crow issued by the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008 was unprecedented, even after decades of lawmakers trying to push the government to finally apologize, NPR reported at the time. In introducing the resolution, Representative Stephen Cohen noted that despite the government issuing an apology for interning Japanese citizens and later pressuring Japan to apologize for forcing Chinese women to work as sex slaves during World War II, the American government had never formally recognized and apologized for slavery and our never-ending Holocaust. That's still ongoing. Okay, while the apology was primarily symbolic, by officially recognizing its role in perpetuating the horrors of slavery and Jim Crow, the American government took a step forward in addressing and atoning for one of its greatest wrongs. So that kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Next, I want to go to this because as Sister Rella so eloquently blessed the mic and stated, they are infiltrating every industry, and the one we need to concern ourselves with the most is politics. Let's get into it. African immigrants, listen to this, are uniquely poised to influence U.S. policy. Now, we've been here 500 years and we have no power where policies are concerned. We even have no representation, yet we're taxed. And yet and still, this is from Quartz Africa. Where's the date? Hold on, y'all. This is July 21st, 2021. Before a crowded room of election night supporters, many of whom look like her, Newly elected Congresswoman Ilhan Omar described the historic occasion of her victory. I stand here before you with many firsts behind my name. The first woman of color to represent our state in Congress. The first woman to wear a hijab to represent us in Congress. The first refugee elected to Congress and one of the first Muslims elected to Congress. The Somali American politician paved the way to victory with the support of the Somali community in Minnesota. Isn't this where Mr. George Floyd, Mr. Dante Wright were executed by the race soldiers? Did we hear anything from Ilhan Omar concerning those two executions? I know I didn't. Anybody can bless the mic if you can tell me otherwise. Back to the text.
Oh,
Go
hold on.
ahead.
Let me say this. So I followed her and I followed her behavior, and she actually came out in the community, got on the mic, and made it about immigration. And I think what she does is when it comes to trauma, Black American trauma, American descendants of slaves, freedmen, FBA people, she will come out. If you put her on the mic, she'll start talking and immediately turn it into a fight for immigration and people from Somalia. Immediately. Look up her protests, her appearance in protests in Minnesota. I'm gonna try to see if I can post some of the recordings that I have of her. But yeah, she's another one. Her and AOC.
They are the worst. And now Rashida Tlaib just won a victory in Detroit. You guys have got to look at what's happening. I'm with Dr. Claude Anderson, who's been screaming for 40 plus years that we are becoming a permanent bottom caste in the country our ancestors built with their lives. If we thought being second-class citizens was rough, wait until they have reduced us to fourth and fifth class citizens, because that is what's happening. And that's what we continue to vote for when we show to these polls without a strategy. When we show to the polls continuing to vote blue, no matter damn who. Reading on, thank you for blessing the mic, Sister Rella. You're absolutely right. They each and every one of them weaponize our Holocaust for their bags and protections. Back to the text. Increasingly, the African immigrant community bears the hallmarks of a group well on the way to self-determination within the American political system. In a way, they are not much different from the American Jews who built the American Israel Political Affairs Committee, AIPAC, into one of the most influential lobbying groups in Washington, or the Cuban Americans who could be considered political gatekeepers in Florida, one of the most important swing states on the electoral college map. So what they are doing, family, is making sure we can't afford to lobby in our own best interest. And instead of filling the government with American freedmen, they're using the immigrants as our Crayola white supremacists to deny us our justice claim. This is what the Democrats and Repugnant class and the corporations that own them are doing to American freedmen. Back to the text. History of African immigration to the U.S. As of 2018, sub-Saharan African immigrants made up 44% of all Black immigrants to the U.S., with almost 20% of them listing Nigeria, okay, Ethiopia, or Ghana. Nigeria and Ghana were very instrumental in trading us into slavery, and they're very instrumental in the Crayola white supremacy that's happening right now. I don't know about Ethiopia so much, but I do know those two as the country of their birth. And it goes back to my point. America with 3 Ks does not allow immigrants into this country unless you've got money and a deep disdain for American freedmen. I don't know much about Ethiopia. I haven't researched if they got any disdain for American freedmen. But I know for sure Nigeria, because they're the ones that keep running around here calling us Akata. Not so sure about Ghana, but Ghana is grifting real hard over this return to Africa, whatever they call it, this return home or whatever the hell they're calling it. It's a grift because they're not offering anything in exchange for that return, like citizenship, land, and reparations of monetary value. Back to the text. Many others were refugees or the children of refugees who were granted asylum in the U.S. in the wake of the Rwandan genocide and the armed conflicts that defined the Great Lakes in subsequent years. So you see, they're done with dealing with refugees of the Black persuasion. Hello, Haiti. They're done with that. And a growing number of them are settling in the states critical to the presidential elections, including Florida, Texas, and Ohio. Yeah, they're very strategic in the places they deem to take over. And they're financially in a position to do it. Because you can't get politics in this country without money. African immigrants are highly educated beyond their numbers. African immigrants are among the highest educated when compared to the other growing immigrant populations and native-born U.S. population, me speaking by design of institutional systemic racism and the very ethno-genocidal plans that the Democrats have for us exclusively. Both parties suck. I'm an independent. But I do know that if we don't hurry up and grow the backbone and the cojones of our ancestors who knew when to drop the repugnant clans for the Democrats and civil rights, it will be to our peril. Back to the text. We've got to close these borders. That's our most imminent threat. We will never get reparations until we bring the Democrats to their knees for several election cycles, until times get better for American freedmen. And it is going to be hard to vote closed border candidates, given that most of them are repugnant clans. But guess what? Whenever the Democrats have a trifecta, we're the only ones in distress. Everybody else got their bags and their peace of mind and their protections. While the corporate with 3Ks mainstream media and the Democrats try to make it appear that we are the ones out here committing hate crimes against other people. They're trying to paint that narrative because they don't want to see, folks all over the world stand up for Black life to matter. And so these are the people that are going to be running this country if we don't become strategic and close these borders and start calls to action to get these people kicked out of their positions as they try to anti-American freedmen racist splain that they're not actually anti-American freedmen racist. All this splaining while doing everything in their power to undermine us and our reparations fight. You think it was hard to pry it from white folks? It's going to be even harder when the Crayola white supremacists are running this country. And it's happening in real time at warp speed. We are out of time. 2053 started with the pandemic, March 2020, when they shut the country down. 2053 for American freedmen is now. We are out of time. Back to the text. So they're the highest educated while they miseducate us, while they lay out 200,000 American freedmen teachers all throughout the country and replace us with immigrants that just got here that don't even speak the King's English and are paying them $50,000 a year or greater. And white teachers to come up into our schools. Now they're talking about allowing these teachers to be armed because of the glacier donkey children who are growing up in the schools and committing mass murder. So do you think what's coming for our children is going to be anything nice when they're able to keep AR-15s nearby and our Black children are in their care and custody? Back to the text. Okay, so they're among the highest educated, which correlates with earnings potential and has an impact on their naturalization prospects. As capable taxpayers and consumers, they are important contributors to the U.S. as a whole and critical to smaller cities scattered across the country that needed revitalization in the wake of globalization and the changing nature of work. So let's educate our children, set them up with immigrant and white teachers for the preschool to prison pipeline, and allow descendants of slave traders into the country to denigrate us and give them position over us, positions that should be bequeathed to us, but that we cannot get. And then we have to be dealing with more trauma from their microaggressions in the workplace and in education. They're not the ones being executed with impunity because they're not in the hoods where poor, unarmed Black men, women, and children are being executed, are having the life squeezed out of them with knees and shit, being tased. They can afford to live amongst the best of the best. Building a coalition. Back to the text. This paragraph first. Taken together, the African immigrant community has the building blocks of an influential coalition. The numbers, both in terms of recently naturalized immigrants and multiple generations of, oh Lord, hold on. Okay, y'all still there. Back to the text. Both in terms of recently naturalized immigrants and multiple generations of Africans parented by refugees and the concentration in multiple locations important to future elections. To fully harness their political power, they'll need to take steps in at least 3 key areas. Building a coalition, effective representation and federal advocacy, me speaking, which they can afford, require a combination of factors: cross-state coordination, consistent grassroots political and financial support, a deep understanding of the U.S. political system, and most importantly, a clearly articulated platform, coalition platform, period. Coalition building requires also leadership, compromise, and prioritization. Giving them the blueprint to take it over from us, family. Reports indicate that the African immigrant community is becoming more politically active after the flurry of assaults on immigration by the Trump administration. Look at how they like to blame him, when as far as I'm concerned, he did the best thing for us by keeping them out. He didn't just come against them, he was against all of it. If you don't believe me, compare the numbers that were able to stay here as compared to when the Democrats are in charge. And you'll see that Trump had ice on their heads to close these borders. And although he wasn't doing it for us specifically, the catch-22 in this whole thing and the irony of it all is that we're safer under the protections of white supremacists, because that's who he fights for, than we are the Democrats, who allow this to come into the country ad nauseum at our peril. This hurts us the most. White high school dropouts are more gainfully employed than college-degreed American freedmen. So as for tangibles, you ain't got nothing coming to be sitting up here talking about no tangibles, no vote. Then you leave the fate of our line in the hands of these very immigrants who seek to replace us and the Crayola white supremacists who hate us. That's what you're saying when you foolishly hold out for tangibles. Because the Democrats lie and the Republicans don't owe us. We're not their loyal lapdogs for the past 60 years. The Democrats owe us. And you see what they've been doing since we put them into, not me. I didn't vote for these two. I voted Green Party. I will not be wasting my votes no more. I'm going straight down the middle and finding every candidate who is interested in Americans first and closed borders. That's the umbrella I choose to be under right now, because this is horrific. Now they're even colonizing the history to deny being involved with this slave trade to the degree that they were. Back to the text. But it is important to note that the level of political influence wielded by the likes of AIPAC usually isn't organically formed. It takes foresight and focus as well as strategic coordination for a group to truly capitalize on its growing numbers, or money, and lots of it. And that's what they've got. When you descend from slave traders and are allowed into this country, you come from money and you're able to build, because this is actually a page out of the American with 3 Ks white supremacist playbook. Is to bring in immigrants who hate us, to give them position and power over us, and then flatten blackness to pretend like we're winning, when that is not the truth for 90% of us who descend from U.S. chattel slavery. I think it's more like 86%. Back to the text. Nowhere is this clearer right now in American politics than with Hispanic voters in Texas who were expected to help deliver the state and its electoral college votes to Joe Crow and the Democratic Party in 2020, but voted Republican instead. Now, they know how to weaponize a vote. Look at how much the Democrats have done for them. And they refuse to deliver them Texas. We, on the other hand, are conditioned to just sheeple walk to the polls to vote blue no matter damn who. And that's why they stay winning. Because they knew and know how to weaponize that vote. And every time they turn on the Democrats after they give them everything, our reparations and protections, they double down on the Republican Party because they're truly more conservative, which forces the Democrats to give them even more because they need them to replace us. African immigrants hailing from 49 countries across 4 very different regions and spanning multiple generations are similarly unlikely to be a monolith. But while Africans can be found all over the political spectrum, there is one area where they may find undeniable commonality: an enduring relationship to their motherland. This connection is clearly evidenced by the remittances to a number of African economies. While the mere existence of these financial flows is not indicative of wider engagement in politics back home, it does show that African immigrants stateside, remain connected to their families on the continent and are likely to have a strong understanding of what takes place there. With effective coordination, relationships to the continent can be the starting point for political engagement. So this is sub-Saharan Africa received $41.8 billion in remittances in 2020. And guess who got the lion's share? Nigeria at $17.2 billion. Meanwhile, the desire for partnership on the African continent has never been clearer, with a majority of nations signing on to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, and the growing number ratifying it. Combined with the proven connection to the homeland and the U.S.'s interest in the trade deal, this could be yet another opportunity for the African immigrant community to build influence over American foreign policy issues while educating U.S. policymakers. Of course, every stage of coalition building that would amount to greater political influence will cost money, of which they've got plenty of. Thus, African immigrants hoping to capitalize politically on their growing numbers will also need to spend time soliciting funds, whether it's small or large contributions, to support the aforementioned goals. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Go to Quartz Africa to pull this article. They also address cultivating think tanks as something that they should do, turning out the vote. And you know it's going to be for the Democrats. Let's look at turning out the vote. I want to read that to memorialize it in this space. The foremost step on the road to organizing and establishing influence, of course, is through the ballot box. African immigrants and the larger African community must take the extra step to register to vote and make the time to do so in local, statewide, and federal elections. Given the patchwork of voter registration laws and recent changes in various states' legislatures, there are different rules and eligibility criteria that one must follow in order to successfully register. You guys be mindful of that this midterm election. Get registered as an independent. You should defect from the Democratic Party. Sign up as an independent, and make sure you know the rules of the road when it comes to your midterms. Get to the polls and vote closed border and reparations candidates only. Party be damned. We are out of time. Okay, let me move on. As a result, okay, back to, I have to find my place, stand by. As a result, grassroots activity is especially important to helping people to register and vote. A number of Africa-focused political organizations, including AfriPac, they got their own pack, y'all, have been doing this work on a smaller scale. To have an effect beyond one jurisdiction, there needs to be state by state coordination to ensure that eligible voters are registered by the respective deadlines and encouraged to vote at the right times. Grassroots campaigns are the bedrock of any national strategy and have been critical to landmark electoral races, such as the one that delivered U.S. President Barack Obama his victory in 2008. African immigrants, this is the last paragraph, are poised to have influence in U.S. policymaking. The facts and figures clearly indicate an ascent. However, the path to greater self-determination within the American political system must be paved with focus, foresight, strategic coordination, and coalition building. So, is that it? I think that might be everything. Yeah, I think that might be it, family, for today. Let me see here. Just double checking. I did want to talk a little bit about the Dahomey slave trade, but it's 2:46. I don't see any more questions, so I will bring that back in a part 2 on these issues. Yeah, the Dahomey, that movie coming out, The Woman King. I'm going to be calling for a boycott because I am sick of Hollywood distorting our history. They don't do this to anyone else's history when they're telling these stories. And they're constantly infusing all of this fiction and not telling the truth about the Dahomey as the slave traders. So I want to expose that more than likely on Monday when I return. We've got to get out here, family.
I put up in the Jumbotron you can change your voter registration information. I posted the link in the Jumbotron. So if you do not know how to do it, you can go right to that link and read the information.
Thank you so much for that, Sisterella. Yes, those are two things we must do. We must defect from the Democratic Party because their nefarious plans to replace us are unmatched. Like Donald Trump or hate him, no one has yet to show me policies as horrific as the ones being crafted by Joe Crow's administration to ethno-genocide American freedmen and replace us with immigrants. No one can show me that. And until you can, I'm not giving a damn about parties. I'm all talked out. There's nothing more to discuss. We've been talking for 60 years for inclusion, and that clearly is not bringing any attention. The Democrats are not paying attention. Instead, they've become more emboldened by the fact that we continue to show up, pushing the blue button to our own peril. That's what they've come to rely on. They're so emboldened that they literally tell you they're not doing anything specific for your group and that nothing will fundamentally change. Well, I'm here to tell you things are changing at a warp speed for the worse for American freedmen. And so I hope that I have made my case yet again for reparations and for weaponizing our vote and to socialize our suffering. If we hold out for tangibles and withhold the vote because we're waiting on tangibles, you got nothing coming unless you bring the Democrats to their knees for several election cycles, and it will still be a fight. So don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe. I want you guys, until we meet again, to make it a beautiful, phenomenal rest of your day and weekend. I'll be back on Monday with more current events, more puckery to make the case for reparations and for the weaponization of our vote and the socializing of our suffering. This is my square. I'm not voting for immigrants to take this country from my daughter or from our line. I am here for freedmen to flourish. And this is the best I've got right now. Because reparations will never come if we keep doing what we've been doing for 60 years for the Democrats. Until next time, family, know that I love you black and I love you so strong. And until Monday, I'm believing for each and every one of us a ton of peace, love, and reparations, reparations, reparations. I'm out.